Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a list of some summer reading recommendations. Summer tends to go one of two ways for people. Either it is extremely busy and you have no free time at all, or you have tons of free time to the point of boredom and you need something to do. Because summer can be so drastically different for so many people, I have decided to break this video up into two different parts to meet the needs of both different kinds of summers. And today's specific video is going to be for people who are super bored and have tons of time. As you can imagine then, most of the books on this list are either a part of a fairly long series or each individual book itself is going to be long. These are the behemoths that are intimidating and that you feel like you never have the time to read, and summer is the perfect opportunity to do it. That said, I absolutely have to start with the biggest books of all, which would be the Stormlight Archive books by Brandon Sanderson. Maybe it's a tad bit of an exaggeration to say they're the biggest books of all, but when I think of giant, massive, epic fantasy stories, I think of this series. Each individual book is over 1,000 pages and it has over 10 point of views per book. In fact, I believe the first one has 18 point of views total, so it is definitely an endeavor to get started with, but once you do, it is so worth it. The world of Stormlight Archive is definitely one that is reminiscent of summer and heat and hopelessness, at least as far as where I live. That's how I feel in the summertime, and it has that feeling ingrained in it. The world building is fantastic. It is in this place called Roshar. The Shattered Plains is the primary location of most of the story, which is this barren landscape that has a ton of different canyons throughout it, and there is a war going on in this setting. One of our main characters, Kaladin Stormblessed, ends up as a slave, and he is known as a bridgeman. It's a group of individuals who have to run bridges in front of the army with no armor for themselves, and they are constantly in danger, and he has to run in front of the army in order to allow the troops to cross these different canyons. Kaladin's story is one of perseverance. It is one of battling depression, of fighting through what feels like it is an impossible situation. And not only that, but he is fighting for other people around him. He is giving hope to those that he is sharing this dreadful life with, and it is something really fantastic to see. The characters themselves are done so well, but the friendships are also done amazingly. While Kaladin is the main perspective of book one, there are a couple of other notable perspectives within the 18 different point of views, one of which would be Dalinar Kholin. He is a high prince of the kingdom of Roshar. He is doing everything to unify what is becoming a broken kingdom, and he is doing it completely at odds with the other high princes. He is so alone, but he values honor, and he is trying to bring honor back to the political realm. The third most notable perspective would be Shallan. She is an individual who is a scholar. She is extremely artistic, and in her perspective, while not as action-packed and maybe not as interesting as the other perspectives, it does allow us to get to know this world even better. She is definitely a character that will play a big role in the story overall. Within the first book, her perspective, I would say, is the least exciting, but you will get a lot of information through her eyes. From here on out, the rest of these stories are not nearly as daunting as the Stormlight Archive, but they are going to satiate your boredom and they are going to occupy your mind and entertain you. And the next one on that list would be the Seven Realms series by Cinda Williams-Chima. A great thing about this series is that if you finish the original quartet, there is now an additional quartet that has come out. So you've got a lot of material to get through if you do end up enjoying this. These first four books follow two main perspectives, which would be Reza Anna Mariana and Han Alistair. The first book is definitely a bit of setup. It's not going to be nearly as fast-paced as a lot of other young adult fantasy books are. It takes its time, it establishes the world, and it also establishes our flawed main characters. When we first meet these two individuals, Reza and Han, they are not the most likable. They're likable because they're relatable and they're flawed, but they are flawed. They are frustrating at times. Sometimes Reza is a bit flippant, sometimes she is a bit selfish and careless, and then Han is definitely somebody who is a bit reckless at times. And so when you first meet them, you are meeting them kind of at their worst, but as the series progresses, you get to see them transform into the people that they will end up being. This series, in my opinion, is one that gets a lot of tropes right. We have the kind of rags to riches character that starts off at the bottom and you are rooting for, you are hoping that they can make it to the top. You've got the kind of arrogant princess who needs to find a husband. You have the magic school setting. You've got so much about this story that is going to be appealing for people that like those tropes, and for people that are hesitant about those tropes and are afraid they're going to turn into cliches. I don't really think they do that here. I think they actually execute them very well. While the world itself is rather contained, you're not going to travel to all of these different kingdoms. It is very well developed and it's very rich. You are going to explore court life, you're going to explore school life, you're going to explore these clans and get to know their culture. So there's a lot to this story, and it's so much fun, but also pretty politically driven. It's a fantastic place to go if you are used to adult fantasy, but maybe you need something just a little less dense. Maybe you need something that, while it still hits all those points that you like in fantasy, doesn't take nearly as much time. I personally found myself, every time I would come back to one of these books, it felt like coming home, and it always was so enjoyable to read. The next series I would recommend would be the Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski. This story follows a monster hunter named Geralt of Rivia. The first 2 books are a collection of short stories, which, even if you aren't the kind of person who likes short stories, I still highly recommend that you start with those. They're easy to get through. A lot of them are grim fairy tale retellings, so it's something familiar, but it's told in a different way, and also very dark. I just said it's grim, but I need to reiterate, they're dark. These were originally written in Polish, so you are likely going to notice that some of the writing style or some of the influences, because it's very Slavic folklore inspired, they're going to be different maybe than what you're normally accustomed to. But the story itself is one that I think, even though it takes place in a fantastical world, so many real world things that we are still struggling with and tackling today are present in these. And something that I absolutely love that Sapkowski does is that he really doesn't try to tell you what is right or what is wrong. He explores varying degrees of good and evil, and that is something I feel so many authors try to do, but Sapkowski, in my mind, just achieves it so seamlessly.
What are you doing? Killing monsters.
We have some of the best examples of gray morality. We definitely get that with our main character, Geralt, but we also get that with the sorceress Yennefer of Vengerberg. She is one of the most fascinating characters. She seems so cold-hearted and cruel and ruthless when you first meet her, but the more you get to know her, the more you discover about her. And the same, of course, can be said about Geralt. I do want to emphasize, though, that this is a story that is not going to have a typical magic system. The magic is very underdeveloped in comparison to a lot of modern fantasy, especially if you're used to somebody like Sanderson, who has very clear set rules and limitations. Not really the main part of this series. You are also not going to be able to likely identify characters by the countries that they're from. You're not really going to be able to tell one culture from the other. They definitely come up as the need arises, but there are so many themes that this tackles. It's very much a story revolving around these themes of destiny and war and good and evil, and so those are going to be the primary focuses. But if you're used to getting, oh, this is how this magic works, here's this spell, here's the word that you have to say to make this happen, not really gonna get that with this. Whether or not the style of the writing or the style of the storytelling is for you, I still highly recommend you check out The Game by CD Projekt Red, The Wild Hunt. It is absolutely amazing. I have a few episodes up of a playthrough that I'm doing with this. I've played the whole thing through before, but it is good enough to play again. You should definitely check that game out. It's fantastic. Switching now to something maybe slightly more accessible and familiar, and that would be the Grishaverse by Leigh Bardugo. The original Grisha Trilogy is what starts off the Grishaverse. It is definitely the one that I think gets a lot of either love or love to hate. But either way, summer would be the perfect time to discover if this world is for you. The original trilogy follows a girl named Alina who finds out that she has the powers that have been in prophecies. She is going to supposedly help heal a divided land. This land is divided by something with tons of these strange creatures, and only her light can destroy them. It's basically the chosen one trope to the extreme. Our main character does not have tons of agency because she only just discovers that she has these powers, but tons of other people have agency and they are going to push and pull her in a ton of different directions. My personal opinion, the Grisha Trilogy feels a tad bit more toward the younger side of young adult, which means that if you are a little more well-read in the fantasy genre, there are going to be things that feel a little cliche or a little predictable. And at that point, that makes perfect sense, but for younger audiences, it's going to be a good introduction for them into the fantasy genre, and for somebody who maybe isn't looking for a Witcher or Way of Kings level of story, this would be a good place to go. My next recommendation would be the Red Rising Trilogy by Pierce Brown. This is a story of heartbreak, of struggle, of perseverance, of overcoming the odds. It is a world where our system is broken up into colors. There are people who are reds, there are people who are pinks, there are people who are golds, and the golds rule over everyone. Our main character is named Darrow, and he is part of the Reds, who are a very oppressed group of people living on Mars. And he, at some point, has initiative to do something to change the system, to break the system down, and from there it's basically action movies packed into books. I think this is a fantastic series if you are a fan of the reluctant hero. If you're a fan of that character who never really wanted to be a part of the fight, they just wanted to live in peace. If you like seeing a character like that be thrust into the action, be thrust into the struggle, you will like this series. That is basically what it is. And the nice thing also is that you only follow one perspective in the original trilogy. This means that you get to know Darrow extremely well, and it means that you have basically no idea what's going on outside of what Darrow knows. Not only are we only getting Darrow, but we're only getting first-person perspectives. You don't get omniscient whatsoever, so you only have the information that Darrow has. This makes for some great twists and turns, some fantastic backstabbing, some fantastic plots that are just not what you were expecting. And for that alone, I would say check this out, but there's so much more to it. It's a fantastic science fiction series, and I can't recommend it enough. Next up would be Peace and Turmoil by Elliot Brooks, which is me. This is the first book in an epic fantasy series that follows the heirs to various different kingdoms as they are trying to navigate politics and their own personal motivations. There is definitely a ton of scheming in this story, and you are originally starting out with getting to know the world, getting to know the characters and the politics, but once the stride really hits, it's going to be a ton of action, lots of magic, lots of creatures, and it's gonna be a lot of twists and turns. All of the characters are varying degrees of gray. Some are a little bit better than others, but because all the characters are fairly distinct in their personality, there are going to be some that people connect with more than others. There are going to be some that you root for more than others. The politics definitely becomes a very complicated, tangled web that all of our characters are ensnared in, whether they want to be or not, and whether they had good motivations or bad motivations. If you like politically driven stories with a large cast of characters, definitely recommend checking this out. And my last summer recommendation, if you have tons of time on your hands, would be Full Metal Alchemist by Hiromu Arakawa. I mentioned Peace and Turmoil having a large cast of characters, but this story, not only does it have a large cast of characters, but I've never read anything else where I like so many of the characters. We follow our two main characters who are brothers who try to bring their mother back from the dead using alchemy. Things went terribly wrong, and one brother lost an arm and a leg. The other brother lost his entire body, and his soul had to be attached to a body of armor. These two brothers, Edward and Alphonse, all they really want is to get their original bodies back, but there is so much more at play than they realize. They are caught up in so much more than they would ever have expected, and it goes from being some kind of campy little story with these two brothers to being so epic and world-ending kind of situations. Like I said, it has some of the best characters I've ever seen, some great character development and character arcs. The growth that the characters have throughout the series is so amazing to see, and there are some really emotional moments in this story. That is it for part one of my summer recommendations. I will definitely be making another video like this for those of you who have really busy summers and you don't have tons of time to get into series like this. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. Let me know what your super bored summer recommendations would be, and I'll see you all later. Bye. Bye.